My name is Scott Schwab. I'm one of the co-founders for Bottega, and the reason Bottega exists is to help students or anyone really to have accessibility to technology, and specifically technology education. And so Bottega, we try to create a seamless process for a person at whatever age or capability, and help them to be able to realize all of the options that are available in the world that we live in today. How we created Bottega was a combination of many people who were looking at education from a different perspective. For me, education has been something I've been passionate about for the last 10 years. I've been in the ed tech space, but I wanted it to be more about accessibility, and for me, about having that validation of the accreditation process layered into what we teach students, but to remove that component of time. We don't believe that it should take somebody years to be able to gain competency. And so the way that we approached it initially was to say, how can we disrupt the model of education? How do we make it more of an experience? So we built out our own learning management system to make sure that the learning environment was consistent and that it was structured and that it gave stabilization to kind of all of the different options out there of, hey, I can learn from this platform or I can learn from that platform. We wanted to standardize quality. And so we did that through both the accreditation process, and we paired that with a learning management system that created an environment for students to learn either in person or online. Bottega really is for anyone, and I would tell you the things that define our best students are those who are hard workers and those who identify that they want to make their lives better, and that Bottega is a vehicle for them. I've seen homeless people who have come through our program and who are now in very good high-paying jobs. I've seen a mom who raised her children who was driving bus for a local school district and then who goes back to work and gains so much satisfaction out of that. So our student is not necessarily one individual or one segment of our population. It's everybody, and we remove the obstacles so that people can access both the education as well as the finance, so that now upskilling your life is not something that you're prevented from. And that's everybody. And that's one of the things that's so important for us, is giving that accessibility in not only how do we access education, but how do we fund our education? And who do we partner with to make it so that individuals have the comfort of access in the comfort of their home? So Bottega removes those obstacles. When we look at coding, coding is not just for the industry or the learning environment of computer science. It's for the liberal arts major. It's for the person who's interested in art. It's for the person who loves theater. It's for the person who's an archaeologist. It's for all of these individuals, because the applications which we use in our daily life were likely built by somebody who saw a different way to do things within their domain or their expertise. And so coding is a complement to any form of education or any form of life, the way that we live it, the way that we access it, the way that we enjoy the things around us. Because digital literacy is in every area of our life, coding allows us to be able to access that from our vantage point. And we have a flexibility and a freedom within this open source marketplace to be able to create. And coding is as much about creation from the creator's point of view as it is about writing code or scripts of what we can access to have a website function the way that we want, or an app to function the way that we want. It's about creation as we see it. And so Bottega providing that access for everybody, whether their discipline is computer science or whether it be through humanities, all of those disciplines are complemented by coding. A learning management system is ultimately a platform that allows a learning environment to be delivered to a student wherever they are. So whether it be through a mobile device, whether it be through a computer, it just allows the students to be able to pick up where they left off, to be able to test, and to be able to do exercises online or in person. The definition for me of digital literacy is comparable skills for the digital today and for the future of what literacy looks like. Digital literacy is to be able to utilize the communication platforms that so much run our lives today. So all of the social media platforms, it's not just social engagement, it's also where we connect. It's where we find our spouse. It's where we find, our deals of where we're going to go and shop. It's where we learn of things. And so today, engagement communication is really done largely online. And for us to be able to be literate, we need to understand all of those aspects, whether it be e-commerce, where we're shopping online or shopping from our phones, whether it be communication, where we're communicating with people down the street or across the world, and where we're also being able to have a platform to introduce things that are important to us. So sometimes that comes in the form of sharing pictures and sharing family stories, but other time in business, it relies around the idea of sharing ideas and the sharing of documents and the sharing of applications that allow us to be able to live our life with more efficacy. So digital literacy is comparable to what many of us remember in the early 1900s with manufacturing and automotive excellence in Henry Ford and some of these individuals who created processes around manufacturing. And we saw so many of our previous progenitors who were going into manufacturing because it was stability. It was where the jobs were going. And so digital literacy is very similar in our age today, which is many of the jobs are moving to digital assets or digital companies or technology companies. It's interesting to me that a group or a company like Citibank identifies themselves as a technology company and no longer as a bank. So to me, it tells me and informs Bottega that we have something to where we can provide an educational platform to help people to transition, whether it be I have an understanding of banking and I want to use the tools that are being used in industry, or whether I'm in farming. I grew up in a small town, and all of the farmers that I know now have a GPS tracking system within the tractor. It tracks the fields. When they look at repairing their tractor, they put on a set of Google glasses that allows them to be able to see what parts of the tractor need to be repaired, and then they can order them right from that aspect of just clicking an order within the Google glasses. It's an incredible world that we live in, and that to me is digital literacy. The importance of being digital literate today is being both relevant and also being able to have the ability to contribute to industry. Whatever way we look at learning and education, we all have our own reasons for pursuing additional education. There's no more education or no more importance on education than learning how to communicate on a larger scale. So for instance, when we talk about what digital communication looks like, many of us think of social media. We're communicating with people down the street, we're communicating with people across the world. And we're doing it through pictures, we're doing it through video, we're doing it through all of these different mediums that allow us to communicate in fun and exciting ways. But how do we continue to keep pace with that when that communication becomes slack for the workforce? And we start to utilize these tool sets that are built into many of the operations of companies today. Or we talk about agile environments where you've got workforces who are changing all of their processes and systems to be able to replicate an environment that allows collaboration, and a lot of it is digital. workforces are now being transformed to being remote and being transformed to people all over the world. So if we think of that importance of being able to be relevant within a working or an industry perspective, as well as being able to communicate with friends and family. I mean, we combat some of those challenges right now with people feeling lonely and feeling removed and feeling like they are not keeping up with friends and family who, ultimately they're utilizing platforms to communicate, and phone calls aren't always the main medium for communicating. So we text, we send videos, we send memes, we send GIFs or GIFs, however we want to call them. But ultimately, it's about communication, it's about relevance in the workforce, because we see the industry moving so heavily towards communication and technology. How digital literacy impacts our daily lives is, let's give an example. If we think about how we used to communicate even 20, 30 years ago, we were centralized to a phone, whether it was a pay phone in one location, whether it was at a home or an office. We had to be within that area to be able to communicate with other people. Well, now we look at what communication has done in our daily lives, and we look at our phones. Our phones communicate not only from a phone call or a simple communication, but it's moved to text. It's moved to communicating within apps. It's moved to be able to send documents through our phones, and to be able to never really have to engage with a computer to be able to actually get things done, to either have communication within our personal lives or communication in office or in business. And that's probably been the biggest change is, the personal computer was a humongous, disruption for, offices and how they used to do coding and how they used to take technology and utilize it in the workforce. Well, personal computers made that to where anybody could take part in those things. The phones are doing the same thing. Anyone with a phone can now use applications to get much more done in many circumstances than just being, again, centralized to a computer. And so digital literacy is used in our daily lives through communication, through the way that we pay each other, through applications like Venmo, Apple Pay, like things like these applications that give ease and convenience to our lives are also making it to where our interaction with like the world that we know of having to run down the street to put in a check, well, now we can take a picture of that check and we find it into our account immediately. And so those are the types of applications that really make a difference and that make digital literacy so important. Digital literacy for any segment is essential. Specifically, we've had students who are of the age of 63 all the way down to 13. And how is it that one platform allows for both of these people to be able to engage and work within industry? Well, it's because digital literacy impacts every segment of all of our lives, from communication to the way that we bank, to the way that we communicate, to the way that we work. Specifically in our company alone, we have multiple platforms that communicate all of our workers, because at times we have people who will work from home. At other times we need to be able to have meetings, and we add value to those meetings by introducing the technology that keeps us on track, that keeps us accountable, and ultimately drives us towards the goals, which is what digital literacy helps us to be able to identify in a workforce that's truly becoming more segmented, and also a workforce that's becoming more remote or more diversified, being that people are all coming from a variety of different domain expertise, domain knowledge, and coding is an actual literacy. So we think about languages, well, coding is a language. And when we can codify the way that we communicate and codify the way that we work together as individuals, as teams, as companies, those applications and those tools allow us to be more effective in the things that we do. And so I would say digital literacy is very important because of that one aspect of bringing teams and companies together, whether they're in person and in front of each other, or whether they're scattered throughout the world. And that's business today, is it's global. The impact of technology on some of the industries, some of the areas that we may not expect is, think of retail and think of the way in which we shop. We used to go down to the store, we would browse, and we would pick up whatever we'd like. Well, we've seen the full disruption of the retail space through companies like eBay, through companies like Amazon. Well, as that we continue to move forward into the future, retail's going to look very different, but so is picking up our prescription from the Walgreens down the street. Why? Because there's things like DoorDash, right? Or an equivalent to DoorDash, where someone will go and pick up the food that we want and bring it to us. Well, how does that impact the way in which we get our prescriptions? How does that impact the way in which we're seen by doctors? You know, even in the medical field today, we have applications that allow a doctor to be able to FaceTime with us. So it will impact every single aspect of our lives. And being able to codify that and be a participant of that allows us to be able to have steady or sustainable work and wages, because every company is clamoring for people who understand or know technology. Last year alone, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that there was over 750 jobs that were left vacant because we didn't either have the workforce to be able to fill those roles, or we just don't have the capability of people to be able to move from one role into more of an elevated role or more of a technological role. And so what we're finding is that, number one, we need to transition a workforce who's already been working and who has skills and who have a domain expertise but now need to retool and upskill. And then we're also recognizing the fact that those coming out of university, particularly in computer science, really only fulfills about 80,000 people per year. You know, when we look at all of the college programs together, we're not even reaching about 10% of the listings for jobs. And so what we need is a workforce that's already been in work and in industry, but will look at the jobs that they've done and the functions that they've performed and look at them from a different angle. How do we do this with more technology? Not to take my job or replace a person's job, but how to enhance the job so that I can focus on more things because I'm not doing the mundane task. And then how do we build this into the schools and into opportunities where people aren't having to wait to access a skill set for 2 to 4 years going through a traditional model? And so digital literacy to us is also accessibility. How do we access that education in our time? And how does that education meet us where we're at? And it meets us where we're at based on online programs and online access, and making sure that even when we're in the workforce, we still have continued education opportunities and professional education opportunities. Our definition of someone who is a non-traditional learner is many different paths of perhaps you're a person who's a senior person in your life, and you may have finished college years ago. Perhaps you took some college courses, but that wasn't your path. Another non-traditional learner is somebody whom has done a portion of college but also had to go into the workforce. It could be a person who has English as their second language. Ultimately, all these learners are benefiting the workforce in a number of ways. And they're already doing that, or they've done that. And the ability that this program has to offer those types of learners and all types of learners is accessibility, right? We can walk over to a computer and we can start working within an educational environment and start to learn English concepts even better than we knew them before. It can help us to understand, well, why is my grandchild trying to help me communicate through applications? Understanding that communication and that flow of how industry and how relationships are migrating more towards a digitally literate type of an environment would inform us that the non-traditional learner is all of us. It's each one of us who are trying to say, I want to learn something new, but do I access that through YouTube? Or do I access that through a documentary? Or do I access that through a white paper or go down to the library? All of us, in one way or another, are those non-traditional learners, and we provide that environment at Bottega so that our students can access that through their personal computer in the comfort of their home, or come down to a campus and enjoy that learning that happens when we collaborate with one another. Bottega addresses the non-traditional learner in a very comparable way for the way that they like to learn. Right? When we look at traditional learning, we look at a process or a pathway of getting somebody through many different courses to have an outcome of maybe a degree, a certification. Non-traditional learners like to find that learning in a variety of different ways, whether it be through a podcast, a documentary, whether it be through talking to other people, whether it be through experimenting on their own. And really, the Bottega program complements that learning very well. Based on the idea that we look at education and say, okay, in 600 hours we can take anyone who has the grit and shows the aptitude to go through our program and come out the other side being someone who is digitally literate. And so we look at that from a full stack development methodology where you learn portions of front-end development or what we see on a website. Databases to where we can go in and we can query databases of information, whether that be through phone numbers or names of individuals, geographical locations. Databases are in everything. And then you've got hardcore backend development, which is if I click on this function on a website, what happens? Is it a drop down? Is it loading a new page? And that, for us, is digital literacy because you understand that whole process. Not that every person that goes through our program is going to be a developer or a coder. Coding, again, is just a language that allows a person to be able to do certain functions, whether that be project management, whether that be a technological lead, whether that be somebody who is working on a team but working with technology experts. Having that understanding and knowledge is very complementary, and our non-traditional approach to that is very beneficial to both the non-traditional learner, and I would even say the traditional learning process eventually gets disrupted when we get into the workforce, because then we have to start learning new skills and new aspects of responsibilities. And where do we learn them? Through continued education, professional education, training. And so really we approach the learning from more of a, what is the pedagogy of learning these skills? And that's why Bottega does so well for both the non-traditional learner and also the traditional learner. The advice that I would offer anyone who's entering the workforce or entering any maybe possible change in their life and trying to achieve that through education is to be a lifelong learner. Don't just stop because you have a credential or you have a degree or you have a level of understanding on something. Be curious and be that individual who wants to learn any way that they can. For me, I love to learn by doing. And so I'll take on a project knowing that I'm going to fail probably 100 times before I actually then start to understand it. And I think we all are very different in the way that we learn. Some people love to listen to podcasts or listen to lectures. Others love to be able to be in the performance side or the project side of things. And that unique aspect, we're all tied together through language. And again, if we go back to coding as a language, we can all communicate in a number of different ways, whether that be through the communication that happens on social media, say, or the communication that actually extends to further applications like how do we exchange information and how do we create economic value and economic impact. Those are the things that, in my mind, if you're going into the workforce, be curious about it all, but then also be true to who you are. What is the core gift or the core knowledge, understanding, or performance that you have or that you know. Bring that, and then disrupt the technology industry to be able to do it even better. Are there ways to be able to do all of the processes that we do in a workflow or in a work experience? Yeah. And people can do that who have spent time in another workforce but now are using technology to disrupt that. The most satisfying aspect of Bottega is what it means for the student. It's been really neat to be able to see somebody come to us who's always struggled for income in their life, and being able to upskill themselves to a point where now they're able to take care of their economic needs and even start putting money away and saving money. That, I think, is probably the biggest difference that we see in our students, is that change in economic contribution or economic accessibility. And I would tell you the other aspect that is so fulfilling is the confidence that comes to people that's visible. The way that they interact with people changes because of their confidence. The way in which they treat people changes because they now have the ability to provide for themselves. And that piece is really what drives at least my personal why, is how do you take somebody who is an amazing individual and give them 21st century skills so that they're now able to continue to work as changes happen all around us in the way that we communicate, the way that we work, the way that we do anything in our lives. I mean, we can now talk to Alexa and have her turn on music, tell us jokes, and do all of these things. Well, coding in many ways is our ability to not just talk to Alexa and have her produce output, but to be able to program Alexa, to be able to turn on lights, to be able to run the functions of our home in new and exciting ways. And that's what coding allows people to do, and ultimately that's what Bottega allows people to do.